Great. Well, again, thank you all for joining the fourth meeting of the Future Severance Water Funding Task Force. We've got a hybrid meeting today. Folks online, as we get to public comment at the end of the meeting, please raise your hand and we can allow you to talk. Same in the room if there's anyone who wants to offer public comment. We've got time carved out again at the end of the meeting, which we expect to run until 3:30 today. It's 2 o'clock and we're just getting going here in the Hyatt in Aurora. I think as folks are aware, there are two primary deadlines for the task force and the DNR and our third party, the Colorado Water Center. The first deadline was January 15th, and that was for the Colorado Water Center to provide the task force with a draft report, which they have done. If you're online, here in the room, you can find that report on our website at the DNR Severance Task Force website. This draft report, as we've discussed in previous meetings, we had about 3 months as a group to come up with this draft. And after the delivery of the draft, we have 7 months until the delivery of the final report. So more time after the draft than before. So as we have discussed multiple times with this group, the initial draft is mostly at this stage background on severance tax collections, allowable uses, fund management, changes in tax policy recently, and then beginning to sketch out the outline of the work for this group as far as a needs assessment for water projects and local government funding, recommendations to potentially fill the gaps in needs. And so a lot of work yet for us to do. But it's very exciting. We're at a stage where we do have some concrete work product to focus on and really start planning out the remainder of the group's work. So the plan here today is to talk through the Water Center's proposed timeline for continued work, talk through the draft, identify places in the sections that are really already filled out, where there's a lot of writing, identify places where we think might need more work, or identify places that we think are good that we can sort of mark as generally complete, move on, and then really primarily identify the places where we need to put continued effort, both from the CSU, Water Center team and from the task force to come to recommendations. So that's how we're planning to structure today's meeting. Happy to take any questions or suggestions on that structure. And I think with that, we wanted to do some introductions briefly. I know everyone on the task force knows each other. I think we've introduced ourselves to the public who have been joining these meetings as well. But the Colorado Water Center has hired an employee who we're excited will be working on the project as well. And so I can pass it to Karen for intro.
Yeah, and I think maybe since we're all, well, not all of us, but some of us are in person, just a good reminder of who's around the table. So Karen Schlatter, Director of the Colorado Water Center, and I want to introduce our new stakeholder engagement specialist, Mindy Bridges, who will be assisting on this project, particularly with interviews going forward and assisting with our research team. And I think it'd be great for the research team to also introduce yourselves as well. Rebecca, if you want to go.
Yeah, I'm Rebecca Hill. I'm an extension professor here at Colorado State University, and I've been leading the research. My name is Rebecca Wasserman-Nolan. I am a PhD student starting to work on this project.
And I'm Tim Coburn. I'm an associate professor in the economics department, and I'm co-director of regional.
And I also just want to take a moment to recognize the work of our research team, their contributions to this report. So thanks to them. Do we want to go around the table? Is that necessary? Maybe not.
Why not? For folks, especially online, I know I do see some new attendees who haven't been on previous meetings, so we can just go around the table briefly and online to introduce the task force members. My name is Nate Pearson. I'm chairing the task force, and I am the Department of Natural Resources Assistant Director for the water policy. I'll pass it to my left. Karen's already introduced herself. Jim.
And I'm Jim Yon from Sterling and Logan County. I'm a county commissioner representative. That's cool.
And I'm Lauren Ress, and I'm the director of the Colorado Water Conservation Board.
Eric Bergman, Department of Local Affairs, Division of Local Government.
Hi, everybody. Robert Sakata,
Ag Water Policy Advisor for the Department of Ag and Acting Commissioner of Ag.
Good afternoon. My name's Steve Wolf. I'm General Manager of Southwestern Water Conservation District, and I represent water conservation districts.
Brian Jackson, Environmental Defense Fund.
I'm Carly Jacobs. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for the Department of Natural Resources.
Elise, and then Doug online, please.
Elise Sackman, Castleberry City Manager with the City of Delta.
Good afternoon, Doug Dennison with EcoPoint Incorporated, representing the oil and gas industry.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. And I think with that, we'll get into the content of today's meeting. As folks either from the public or the task force are listening to the conversation as the Water Center is going through proposed timeline report, you can comment now, but there's also a public comment form on the website. Folks can provide written feedback. And again, each meeting, we're holding time for public comment. So please always feel free to speak up, even if you're not on the task force, but especially if you're on the task force. And with that, I think I'll pass it to Karen to talk through the timeline, and maybe go ahead and share your screen.
Yes, so we're gonna just take a second to remind folks of our timeline. So we put together, based on our July 15th final report date, which is at the bottom of that list. We kind of worked backwards to see what we needed to do and when. So we're hoping by now, start at the top, by February 28th, the end of February, we're kind of closing off the time of when we're really seeking some additional alternative funding options to explore. And then taking the remainder of March and half of April to really dive in on research and analyses on key options that hopefully we're prioritizing today and in February. Working on the final report write-up, April 15th through May 15th, giving you all that next version of a draft report on May 15th, collecting comments through the end of May, and then getting kind of that more final version, June 15th, and an initial draft to a graphic designer, giving some additional time at the end of June for any additional edits and revisions. Final content to the graphic designer July 1, and then we have our final report July 15th. So we do want to have a nice looking kind of executive summary version that we will provide to different audiences as part of this work. So that's what our timeline looks like. And I guess just a reminder, we are hoping to kind of wrap up our brainstorming of ideas by February. So as much as we can do that today and in our meeting on February, and kind of hone in on our key concepts that we're pursuing for the research side of things, that is helpful. Any questions or suggestions on our timeline?
And I think I'll say it's my goal to schedule another meeting either right on or right before that February 28th date, with the idea of having at least one more discussion as a group before we sort of close that. And I know if somebody has a brilliant idea on March 1st, I think we could still find a way to work it in. But I think as Karen has expressed, in order to conduct research analysis, get a really clear write-up that still has time for our feedback, I think important to start setting these interim.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just provide one other caveat. You can give us a brilliant new idea on, May 1st. We just won't really explore it very much in the report. So maybe we'll put it in there, but we won't go into depth on kind of different aspects of it. So. Okay, so I think we can now start looking at the report. So as Nate said, we're going to kind of just walk through different sections of the report and kind of do a yay, nay, like, are we good with this? Can we move on? I did receive some comments from folks via email, and we'll be incorporating those comments into the next version of the report. But I want to take this opportunity altogether to just walk through the different sections and then gather feedback as we're doing that. So first, we're going to just look comprehensively at the different sections. And this is largely based on the outline that we all agreed upon for the report that you all gave feedback on previously.
I'm just working on sharing my screen.
So let's start, and hopefully folks have a copy in front of them on their screen. It's going to be sharing.
Yes. Getting done.
For the introduction, which included kind of a little bit of background on what the task force is, what the bill is, a little bit of background on severance tax, what we're tasked to do, and then it goes into kind of study methods, goals, and intended outcomes. I don't think I received many comments on that, or any comments perhaps on that section of the report. Did people feel like that was addressing the scope and there wasn't significantly, any content missing from that?
I know. Apologies to letting this screen jump around.
And of course, this is not your only avenue to provide feedback as well. We can continue to gather comments individually on the report. Yeah. Eric.
Please, Eric.
I'll take myself off mute. Sorry, old habits die hard. So first off, I want to say that this is really well written. I was telling you earlier, I'm quite impressed with it. It's very readable, and a lot of times when you're working with academia, no offense, friends here, but I see stuff that is it comes off like, it's more like some kind of a very different document. This is really good. It's very readable. I think it's a great first draft. I think one of the things that just kind of popped out at us, I know, we're talking about water, and you're a water center, and obviously DNR is all about the water. And I know it talks about local governments and their programs. I feel like almost like a word search. Every time we say local governments, for us, it's water plus. We are doing water systems, but almost more often not than water. It's wastewater systems and roads and other public facilities, buildings, maintenance shops, this kind of stuff. So to the extent that we can maybe just do, like, whenever we talk about the water, I think in the same breath we want to say, and I think one time it says there's local government programs, and there are some programmatic things we fund out of energy impact, but it's like about 65% of that funding is going for infrastructure, which kind of goes across a broad array of types of projects. But I just want to make sure we are capturing, because I know this group, like I said, water was the initial thrust of the bill. We kind of came in and shoehorned ourselves in there late in the game. But I just want to make sure though that whenever we say water, we're also saying really the full array of projects that we're doing out of the Severance, out of the energy impact program, to the extent possible. Thanks.
I really appreciate that comment, Eric. And a couple thoughts. One, as we're going through this, speaking up, keep as the bulk of this group is water people, I think keeping us honest to stay focused on the program. I think also having you, Jim, Elise, our local government reps here, if there are ideas that you feel need to be injected, I think, speak up, make sure they're being represented. If there are communities or stakeholders that we should be reaching out to hear those voices, please help us get connected with them. And so
100%. And I think my interview,
yeah,
which was a grilling interview, by the way, it was like an interrogation. I think we did suggest a lot, here's some other places to call and get some ideas from. I think for me, just so I mean, obviously I'm a local government guy for years and years and years, but I think my other concern is that people who read this, if they start thinking that, DOLA is just doing the same thing that DNR does, it seems kind of repetitive. And I do not want to give that impression at all that we're kind of just, oh yeah, we're both doing water stuff. So really, one or the other, I just don't want anyone to get that, come away from the report with that impression who isn't familiar with kind of the ins and outs of where severance tax goes. So that's kind of is the underpinning of my concern. So thanks again. And again, it is really well done. So thank you guys very much for your work on this. It's quite impressive. So thanks.
Thanks, Eric.
I was just gonna say, it brings to mind another thought that I want to make sure I didn't come back to maybe later in this discussion, but as we're talking about future potential funding options, obviously local government and water funding and other natural resources funding have been coupled for a very long time under severance tax. And I think I would like the report to have some treatment and discussion of under what scenarios it makes sense to keep them coupled, whether there are scenarios where it makes sense to decouple them and potential funding streams are more individualized. So yeah, it's an interesting ecosystem that's evolved. And I think I would like a report to have some discussion of how they work together, how they might work differently in the future or not. So something for us to come back to, but I think Carly had her hand up as well.
Yeah, I'll just echo Eric's compliments on the report. It's really excellent start for us to work with. I think I had some similar feedback related to how the operational fund fits into the scope of the task force. That funds a multitude of different programs within DNR. I think there's a strong water thread through a lot of those programs, but they're not all water specific. And that fund has some unique challenges given sort of the nature of the permanent ongoing funding that it supports. And I think we respond maybe differently to severance tax volatility with that than some of the other funds that we're talking about. So I just want to make sure that we don't lose sight of the fact that all of those programs are going to be affected by the same kinds of revenue availability, long-term trajectory type things that we're talking about here, and would be subject to any sort of solutions that we might suggest. So I know it's a little bit tricky because of sort of like what you were mentioning, the focus on water and local government, but if we can incorporate that sort of specifically into the conversation, I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I think given the bill's impetus and focus was the impact of transfers from severance tax into the general fund. I think all of the programs that receive severance tax are on equal footing. And so local government, water, and then these other natural resource programs that have certainly water elements, but also other places. It's a great comment. And so I guess just while we're going through this, right on this page here is sort of the table of contents. And so I think the comment that you just provided, Eric, I think I'm reading as building out more fully this section on local government funding in Colorado. Carly, as I hear you talking about the severance tax operational fund, I think that is maybe either, built out in this water project funding or a separate section for the operational fund or like other natural resource programs supported by severance tax. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, and I want to acknowledge that the operational fund is covered in here at a very high level, but certainly happy to assist with an additional section if that's the best way to organize it.
Yeah, was that in the severance taxes in Colorado section?
I think that's right. Maybe a historical use. Yeah, distributions. I think that might be what it is.
So as we go in this, yeah. So this is the history of severance tax collections and distribution section. See collections over time.
It's on page 8.
Yeah, page 8 here.
Or my page 8.
Nate, presentations that you've done to CWCB, you kind of have diagrams that show the breakout where it goes. You might be need to insert a diagram to help us visually understand where severance tax goes.
Like the pie chart.
Or a flow diagram. Something, but yeah.
Oh, I've got a flow diagram.
I think I often in this process jump ahead of where we're going towards replacement and what are those things that will ultimately take to voters to replace this. And so I think a great value of this report can be the plain language. This is what we need. And these are the programs that are going to need to be backfilled or refilled or future filled by whatever this is, so that, you know, operational stuff, like somebody could just pick this up and say, oh, that's gonna have to be part of the new tax or the new fee, the new thing. And really just explicitly laid out.
Yeah, I agree, Brian, thank you.
I was looking on this, it looked like, you have a lot of background things, historical, which I like. What about other efforts that have looked at water funding in the past?
Yeah,
Do we have a review of that? I know because one of the guys that we'd come up from Sterling to all these meetings, Joe Frank with the Lower South Platte, he was part of a similar group for the Walton Family Foundation that discussed this extensively and came up with recommendations, and out of it came the DD proposition. So it seems like we should have a little, because they came up with other ideas too. Some of them they didn't like, and so it would, there may be other efforts that have happened that maybe should be included in the historical part so that it would. move forward.
Yeah, I was gonna raise that too, Jim, because I know exactly what you're talking about, and I believe that the IVCC even took that up for a while and had a lot of conversation about that. And there was even an attempt to run a bottle fee that was quickly killed. But I guess I thought maybe we weren't there yet, and that you were gonna still include some of that information in future drafts, maybe.
So yeah, I think that is absolutely where I want this, where I think we're going. And so I think that is, my expectation is that we are not starting from scratch as much as possible.
Right.
There is analysis out there. I think, we've put the call out for, you know, groups that have products that they've, developed in the past to share them. I have had at least one shared with me on the bottle fee that Lauren mentioned. And I know we will work to get that posted on the website. If there are others that are able to be shared, encourage anyone listening or anyone here to share them. So all that to say, agree entirely. And I think that's an important part of what we're doing here is hopefully breaking new ground, but also making sure that all of the work that's been done on this in the past is represented and easily accessible for future decision makers to pick up and run with. And Elise, I see that you've got your hand up. Please feel free to jump in.
I love how we all end up starting to go down the same line of thinking in groups like this. Just to build on some of the comments about looking at that historical context, one of my notes I have, which is very related, is that I hope we can go just a step further than maybe some of the previous studies and previous work before us that maybe suggested ideas and really identify the actionable next steps so that this work doesn't just reflect good thinking, but actually starts to lay out how we could get there. That aligns with some of the other comments already made, but some of this is bigger than just voter approval. And I think we get focused on that component when we're trying to address these big things. But we don't necessarily think through what it takes to even get in front of the voters in the first place. So what are those key actionable steps that need to happen on the final recommendations that we all come together on? Some of which are obviously repeats of previous work ahead of us because they're good ideas.
I would just throw out one caution. I think some really good work has been done. I think some really good thoughtful stuff has also been done. This is a very public forum and it should be. Sometimes those things, say a bottle fee, we start talking, seriously about a bottle fee, Coke and Pepsi, read the transcript and they are ready. Right? Coke and Pepsi are famous for opposing bottle fees nationwide. If we come up with $100 million tax, they have 99 million reasons to kill it. And so I think there's an element of general sort of direction that can be taken in this as a task force maybe. And then handing it off to additional people who could run with it, maybe.
Yeah, can I just want to ask the task force as a whole, in terms of the scope of the final report, and it relates back to Elisa's comments on kind of developing actionable steps. I think what my understanding and the research team's understanding of the final report is we're essentially laying out a menu of options. We're presenting kind of what goes along with those options, potential barriers, limitations. What are some of the benefits of those options? Does the task force need more than that? And is that within the scope of work that we have? What is actionable steps?
I think we run a risk of overwhelming those that this is intended for unless we can identify some key first things that happen. That's my thinking.
Yeah, Elise, I think that point is well taken. It's a really complex subject. Not just all the programs we use it for, but also the fiscal policymaking process is really complex. And so I wonder if, you know, whereas this group may have a list of 10 or 15 potential funding options, you know, maybe none of which are ready to be implemented right away. Maybe some are, but certainly, you know, if we're looking at a menu of options, they may not all be appropriate to happen all at once. And so I wonder if, you know, your suggestion may be adding a section of the report that sort of outlines the policymaking process for fiscal policies like that. I know legislative council staff came to this group in one of our first meetings and talked about some of those constraints. And Elise, I'm curious if you think that goes far enough to address the issue you've identified.
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, it's almost, you know, there are funding sources or funding ideas here that are maybe potentially how policy is made at the legislature, but there's also voter driven ideas here, and they have different pathways. I think we need to be able to articulate what those is. I think that goes to the point that there are barriers for many of these things, and if we're not realistic about them and how to even begin the first steps of addressing those barriers, I think we hit the barriers and we want to stop because that looks difficult. But we're going to have to go beyond that barrier if any of these things are going to come to fruition.
Well, and I feel like it's helpful maybe to identify who the change agents are, for lack of a better term, for all of this, because I think to your point, Elise, it's the menu of options, the paths are different for how you get to the outcomes that we might be recommending. And so it's almost like different, I don't know, different levels of next steps.
Almost your low hanging fruit versus, you know, your midterm, long-term strategy.
I do think, just back to what's already been said around this table and virtually, the biggest, best thing I think that we can do is identify what we need and what we need it for and assign dollar figures to that. You know, if we did a bottle tax, and I'll just keep coming back to this can be like our very specific. But it could be a $100 million bottle tax. It could be a $25 million bottle tax. It could be a $300 million bottle tax. All you have to do is just change the math. And so that becomes a very different question than, okay, what do we need $150 million for? And that expertise lies here and like where we can see around all those corners. And that I think should be reflected in the report.
So I think that's a great point, Brian, and I want to come back to that. I just sort of germane to Lauren's point there about there's different change agents, there's different levels, like even in the example of a bottle tax or fee, like that could be implemented as a voter approved tax. If the General Assembly determined there was an appropriate nexus between the spending, that could also potentially be implemented as a taper exempt enterprise. It's like different ideas could go different pathways depending on how they're structured as well.
And I would say that there may not be one idea, it might be a combination.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't have to be one thing that fills all of the buckets.
And so I think it seems like there's coalescing around the idea of maybe a section of the report that talks about by what means are changes like those discussed in this report, actually made. Is that how do folks feel about adding a discussion of that in the report? Cool. That's for those who can't see us nodding. I want to come back to the needs assessment piece, Brian, and maybe get a little more into the details of how we as a group come to one specific, or come to the most easily understood definition of need. There's a lot of work products out there from a lot of different organizations that either define need within a small geographic area or bigger geographic area. And so I think we're looking at water and local government funding needs and other natural resource program needs across the state. And so I would really love this group's thoughts on how we define that. I'm happy to start with a couple thoughts first, and then we can go from there. So and Carly, I'll start with the natural resource programs. And so I think the programs supported by the Severance Tax Operational Fund generally support state staff with relatively discrete needs. I think those programs can grow over time, shrink over time. There's at least now a relatively solid starting point for many of those. There are also grant programs under there, so that may make it more difficult to forecast need. But I think that is maybe one of the more defined starting points we have to go from. That's just one of these sort of three main buckets we're looking at in severance tax funding. I think the others get a little more difficult, but maybe we talk briefly about the operational fund and the natural resource programs, and then we move on to the local government fund and the perpetual waste fund. So, Carly, I'm sure you have thoughts on what I've just said, so please jump in.
No, really, I was just breathing. That wasn't a big breath to like take things. Thank you for saying that. No, I think that's right. They have defined appropriations, and I think that's probably a good place to start. I think that kind of speaks to a larger issue of whether what it means to sort of make whole versus address a gap, which I think probably is maybe a different discussion for maybe the other funds there. We have $160 million of severance tax on average every year. And so at a baseline, that's kind of the break even point, but having the needs assessment above and beyond that, I think is really important for the other funds in particular. I don't think we want to I think it's probably not as productive to get into sort of estimating the potential needs for the grant programs in there. I think starting with the appropriation is all right.
Yeah,
Please.
in my mind, it's useful to break the needs into the different buckets. Because I think different funding sources may be, allowable for this bucket, but not this bucket. So it might be a bit of mix and match. So I guess I kind of like that sort of bucket approach.
Yeah, thanks.
I think that's, if I can just chime in, I think that kind of speaks to what Nate was saying about some of the different structures that you could consider. So like, if you're looking for a nexus with a fee, that's gonna be a very, we may not fund the Energy and Carbon Management Commission with the same kind of fee as we would a bottle fee or something like that. So you're right. I agree.
And maybe just to underscore what I was sort of referencing there about the difference between the buckets the funding goes to is the Severance Tax Operational Fund has defined appropriations annually and very discrete needs, staff needs year over year must be met. Whereas both the local government fund and the perpetual base fund sort of rise and fall as revenue comes in. So somewhat, I think, out of necessity over the years, the programs have structured themselves around the inherent volatility of severance tax. And so I think pointing out that the operational fund is unique in that it has very significant annual obligations that are not sort of grant program based. And Steve, I agree. I think as we're talking about this, I think breaking the needs assessment out by sort of category, I think does make a lot of sense. Other thoughts on the operational fund piece of this and any thoughts online? For those online with question, is it, I'm guessing at this point, it's not helpful to have my screen shared with the table of contents from the board. I think I'll stop doing that.
Better than a massive version of our faces.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right, yeah.
I'm going to stop sharing and we can go to jump to specific sections as needed.
That could be really good.
Can I go back to what we were just talking about? So we have discussed trying to understand needs of water projects statewide, and they've talked about, the basin implementation plans and what I just heard is that is not, and maybe I misheard, that's not necessarily very helpful. We have a defined appropriation. Let's go forward with that, and then we'll look more into kind of the local government and the perpetual base funds. Is that?
So I think for the severance tax operational fund, we have those defined appropriations, but for the perpetual base fund, we don't. And so I think perfect segue into talking about, like, for that segment of the needs assessment, how do we get at the water funding? And I think the basin implementation plans is as good as part of that, and maybe a good place to start that discussion. And so make sure we don't have any comments online. So I think just to round out the discussion on the operational fund, which is again, 1/4 of severance tax distributions end up in the operational fund. I think we can work to define the current need and come back to the group to discuss whether or how it's appropriate to, like, adjust that into the future. But I think we have a relatively defined starting point for that 1/4 of severance tax revenue. And I think maybe shifting to the next 1/4 of severance tax revenue that comes to the DNR, we can talk about the perpetual base fund and water funding. And so,
Nate, can I
please.
Just really quickly on the operational fund, it might be better to define the current appropriations as the minimum
Yes.
need. Just as we're talking about that, I think that's probably a fair characterization. Like that's given the obligations of the fund and the permanent sort of ongoing nature of the funding that has to happen there, I think referring to it as sort of like the floor of funding for those programs is probably appropriate.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And so let's talk CWCB funding then. So I guess maybe as a 30-second overview, I mean, severance tax revenue comes into the CWCB and enters a revolving loan fund that for 50 years now has been growing as loan repayments are coming back in, as interest is being earned. And so the fund is managed much differently than the operational fund we just talked about. Being able to smooth the sort of average collections is really meaningful for being able to offer consistent levels of grants and loans each year. And even without severance tax revenue, the fund would continue to exist due to loan repayments continuing to come back in. So anyway, I just,
At a smaller scale.
at a much smaller scale, that's an important part. But I just wanted to underscore that important difference in how the funds exist. That money, again, is loaned out at low interest rates to communities who need to construct water projects. It's granted out in many cases under terms and conditions. The General Assembly makes appropriations from that on an annual basis, again, based on available revenue need. So it is spent very differently, managed differently, spent differently.
And if I can just add,
Please do.
to add to that just briefly, the way that we operate that fund pretty conservatively and determine how much we have available to loan out or grant out based on like a 10-year running average. So we try and take the volatility of severance tax and smooth it out a bit in terms of how we actually manage the loan and grant program. So that's not to say it doesn't have an impact, like if severance tax were to plummet or whatever reason disappear entirely, like that would be a big loss and a hit to that fund. But we're able to sort of absorb and minimize some of the volatility by just how we manage the fund that's available, because we're not making promises before we know what's coming into the fund. If that makes sense.
And Lauren, do requests for those funds typically match up pretty well, or is there a surplus of requests? Is there a dearth of requests?
Yeah, so the primary purpose of the perpetual base fund is to provide low interest loans. And so it's more complicated than a grant might be, because the the reimbursements to the loan is, in many cases for water projects spread out over many decades. So we're able to sort of time, various projects that we're funding and issuing loans to, we're able to sometimes take on more of an obligation than we actually have funding in the bank, so that we can kind of time that out and make the payments out to those projects in a way that's, more synchronized with the funds that are available, if that makes sense. So it's not a straight answer of like money in, money out, because the payments take place over a long period of time. And then of course we're repaid over an interval as well.
You're able to keep up with the requests for loans.
Right.
It's not like people are just wanting to get in and get loans from you.
No, that's right. Yeah.
You're
But I think we do see some projects like the Northern Integrated Supply Project, which is a really expensive, big project in Northern Colorado that's requested a lot of money, but we know that that's not going to be all out the door at one time.
I think it's an important point that gets at how we might start defining need, because I think what the CWCB sees in requests in a given year is a function of what water providers or agencies have ready to go.
Yeah.
It's sometimes a function of what's available, that they may know that CWCB can't support $100 million ask this year, so they're not going to bother applying. And so I think I've been trying to give thought, and I really want this group's thoughts on how we define not just the total need that's out there, but also potentially a separate number, which is what proportion of that need is it appropriate for the state to fill, versus federal, local, private dollars. And so Karen mentioned that, but each basin roundtable maintains a basin implementation plan list. I'm curious, Lauren, if you might talk a little bit about what those lists are and what they aren't.
Yeah, I was gonna go there, but I didn't
yeah.
want to jump,
Please.
too far ahead. So we have what's called a project database, and you can find it online if you're interested. That tries to be just a running list of potential projects by basin. And they're informed by the basin roundtables, and some of those projects are included in the base implementation plans, which are the specific documents, sort of like mini water plans by basin. And it's not meant to be static. So the information that's in the database is meant to, change as we get more information about projects, but it's difficult to come up with a single dollar figure or even a dollar figure by basin because things change. Permitting changes, costs go up and go down, and various water projects become feasible and then others fall off the table. So it's more like a running list of possible water projects and not definitive by any means. And for those of you that have worked with roundtables, Robert, you can probably attest to this, that it's always been a challenge of the CWCB to come up with a final dollar figure of what the project need is around the state. So we have estimates out there. But because how we fund water projects in Colorado is so decentralized and relies on really ground up feedback, that it's difficult to come up with a single estimate, but that's our best guess at this point. And we're actually undergoing an effort right now to work with the roundtables as we start to update the water plan in this next planning cycle to take another crack at this project's database, and to make sure that everything that's in there is up to date. Because I think there are some relics in there that are no longer a viable option, but continue to live.
Thanks, that's really helpful, Lauren. And so I think Brian has suggested that addressing that needs assessment is maybe the most important thing we can do. I would suggest it may also be one of the hardest things we'll have to do. And so if folks have thoughts now, please voice them, but I would love for this group to spend more time thinking about how we take that project database or any other resource and zero in on.
And I'd be happy to send the link around to the database, and you can kind of get a sense for what I'm talking about. Like, there are estimated costs for some of them, but I looked at the Arkansas right now. The majority of projects in the database have zeros next to the project ideas, just because that's where they are in the planning phase. They don't know what the estimated costs are. So anyway, you can see the best efforts we've.
Yeah, I would just add, the BIPs are a great place to start, but in one sense, it's a wish list with not complete information, a lot of projects. So if you added everything up in there, it'd be a huge number.
Right.
But the real projects that are semi-ready to go or could go, it's gonna be a lot less of, but it does show a big need.
So I think for us to reflect that, we'll need to make some decisions and assumptions about how.
And in the database, we've tried to identify the readiness level of projects. So projects that are like ready, shovel ready now versus like long-term. And you'll see that the estimates for the long-term projects are pretty thin because there's just not that much information out there.
Any other thoughts, either online or in the room, on how we define need for water projects? I think this is absolutely something we need to carve out space at future meetings, and would love folks to give thought to in the interim.
What is the timeline for future projects?
So we're just right now embarking on the technical update to the water plan, which starts the work analyzing the available data, and then we feed that back to the roundtables, and then they develop their plans. So I think, the technical update, we're about 3 years out, and then another 2 or 3 years for the base implementation plan. So not soon.
Yeah, that's helpful. I was also wondering what, the projects that are in the database right now. Yeah. What is the timeline of those projects? Do they go out 10 years? Do they go out 20 years? Do they go out 3 years?
There's not.
I think that scope is important.
Yeah, there's not defined.
How we're defining need. Is it all water projects forever in Colorado?
I think, like Steve said, it's really a wish list, and we don't have actual quantitative numbers associated with their readiness level. We just have immediate, short-term, mid-term, long-term. So I think, long-term, I don't even know how basins would define that. 50 years, 30 years.
Yeah, no, I think you really have to pull out the ones that have enough information to say they are sort of ready in the next 5 to 10 years.
Uh-huh.
And have enough information to assess them, base something on that, because again, there's a lot of very long-term stuff in there, I think.
And so I think in the short term, I think we could probably start writing up some discussion of just how difficult it is to forecast water projects and the fact. And then as we start making some assumptions, being clear about what those assumptions are, so that, you know, others who may want to make different assumptions could see clearly how we've done our work.
Yeah. I actually think that would be helpful, just some context for why it's difficult to come up with you know, a good estimate, why there's variability, why that's a challenge.
Very well, I do want to move on and talk about defining need for local government projects. But was
That'll be a lot easier.
Yeah. Yeah, yes, Karen's got a follow-up here before we move on.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure we were adequately defining what water projects. And we have some language in the report currently. And I think Carly provided some feedback on particularly maybe the operational, how the operational funds are being used. So that will, again, inform our scope of how we're forecasting the need. What is in this bucket? And are we defining it correctly?
I think the way, Karen, that you have it defined currently in the water projects funding in Colorado section that starts on page 21. I think that's accurate as far as how CWCB is able to fund projects. So it's really limited to the water supply side and not the water treatment side, which you've included. It excludes domestic water treatment and distribution systems. So I think that's accurate.
You could add a lot of things in here,
Mhm.
so it's kind of hard to, you know. I was looking at an alternative low use crops is one that I wouldn't even thought of to put in there, but. It is a thing, you know, one of the things we look at is just the whole. Drought, using agriculture for drought recovery and water sharing agreements and collaborative multi-purpose storage things, and that kind of things is where our roundtable focuses heavily on those kind of things. But you know, you've mentioned it generally enough. I think any of those things can probably fit in there. So I wasn't going to say anything until you brought it up. So but,
Yeah, is there anything else we should call out that we're excluding? As opposed to trying to put everything listed.
I mean, it just occurs to me, you could include the other entities that provide water funding, like Water Power Development Authority provides.
USDA.
Right.
There's a handful out there.
Right.
Other.
Or even CDPHE, I mean, to get at the treatment and the quality side, because this you know, really the severance tax funding for water just goes to what you've identified. As far as kind of the supply side of things.
Lauren, quick question just for clarification. In here, it says, CWCB, the loan program. Lists the projects that it funds, and that says excluding domestic water treatment and distribution. But you will fund distribution, just not the treatment side, is that correct?
Yeah, we can fund the infrastructure. I should look up the actual language. I think we can fund basically the infrastructure leading to the treatment facilities, but not the treatment facilities.
Not the treatment, but on the other side, just distributing clean water
Yeah.
after the treatment. I think you
Yeah,
always historically.
And we probably have language that is very
So
accurate,
just-
so I can.
That's small clarification.
Good point.
sounds like we can move on.
Are we adding some more stuff in there? Do we want to include weather mod or measurement, snow measurement?
I think addressing emerging or
Technologies.
developing technologies. And it may be hard for us to forecast those needs, but to just note that there are emerging fields that may require or garner more investment in the future. I think maybe is a way to approach that.
I like that.
So at least some of that stuff's typically in the projects bill, correct? Which isn't coming out of severance tax, it's general, fund, is that correct?
It is severance tax.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
But I think to Robert's point, like there may be a technology out there. It's almost ready for prime time that none of us are aware of right now that may require future investments. But that's hard for us to get our arms around. But yeah, thank you. So let's talk local government. We've spent a while talking about natural resources and water. I'm really curious to get your sense of the landscape of like how projects currently bubble up, how you all are tracking need and how we might get to a needs assessment for local government.
Sure. Well, this will be not scientific, but, we have regional managers all around the state, 8 of them in all. Who live out in the areas, Greg up in Jim's region, who are in like constant contact. I mean, I informally refer to them as the DOLA missionaries. I mean, they're out there on the ground, boots on the ground, living in those communities, traveling constantly, talking with commissioners, with managers, with mayors, council, staff. So that's kind of our, it's unscientific, but that they are the ones who have their finger on the pulse locally. So, I mean, there's various studies out there and inventories of, this and that. And, like there was a study last year by was American Water, the guys we got stats from the American Society. Yeah. They did big studies like that are showing like the gap between what the need is for infrastructure versus what's there. And obviously these projects are all, for large scale infrastructure, these are years in the making. Jim can tell you, I mean, there is, it's not like you just decide tomorrow you need to go fix something. It's like there's been a schedule here and an intent and saving for that and trying to finance that and then maybe coming into the state to try to leverage, for a grant or a loan from any of these sources, whether it's energy impact or it's other, USDA, et cetera. But that's to my knowledge, that's kind of how we're tracking, unless maybe you guys have another.
We do work with CDPHE. They do have a list of drinking water quality projects. They collect.
Okay. Victor Chen, ladies and gentlemen, he's the brains of the operation. But yeah, so I mean, but I mean, we're very aware. We don't have, like I said, it's not like we send out a survey every year, but there is various databases. Plus, a lot of it is just word of mouth or just knowledge from working in these communities. Who's coming forward? Who's in the no pun intended, in the pipeline, coming down a year out, 2 years out from needing to replace something. And then of course, the wild card is we occasionally, we get, state regulatory, CDPHE, suddenly, a compliance letter comes in and that might bump somebody to the front of the line because they've got, some water quality issue with their drinking water that needs to be addressed post haste. And so a lot of times those will kind of jump the line a little bit, but that's, broadly speaking, that's kind of how we operate as far as development of projects and kind of what we're seeing coming down the road. But more to it, I'm sorry, Nick. This is why, the disruptions we've had in the last few years have been so acute because, like I said, we normally have 3 grant rounds a year and out of our energy impact program. And governments, they know them, they know when they're coming, they're anticipating, we're not coming in this round, we're targeted, to come in next June. And then all of a sudden, we have like last year where this ad valorem, unprecedented, tax credits get issued that wipe out $100 million in severance revenue just for our shop alone. And suddenly we have to cancel 2 rounds. And so all of a sudden, you have this backup of projects that were, people who were planning to come in the summer round, and all of a sudden they're having to wait 6 months or even a year. And it just plays it's havoc. There's not enough money anyway. And then all of a sudden you start backing it up. And those who are planning to come in the summer now are pushed to, the next year. And now you're doubling up all of a sudden. And there's not enough revenue there in the first place. So it becomes really untenable situation very fast.
And so do you have thoughts on how to translate that really fluid situation? Right, where a starting point would be for us to try to define need? Is it just starting with like average historical severance tax distributions as like a baseline need? Are there ways we might try to, and this isn't a question you have to answer right now, but I think a question for us to address as we go forward, how might we?
I think with the.
Just we can Dal
Yeah.
pick it up. Dave Bowman, my deputy.
Just with the volatility we've seen, I mean, there's always, you're looking at the intersection of supply and demand. And we always have more applications than we have money. So we can't really tell where that ceiling of demand is. I do think there might be an opportunity to look at capital improvement plans at the local government level. That would probably be a heavy lift to try to aggregate all that, but most local governments, they're gonna have their 10, 20, 30, 40-year plan. So they know what their needs are and they just have to prioritize based on their resources.
Thank you.
Has that been aggregated anywhere previously?
Not that I know.
Because you're talking about, 270 municipalities, 64 counties, and then umpteen special districts out there that are operating both, serving these same populations, but it's a very, very large number of plans you're talking about.
We might be able to do a sample of local governments and come up with an estimate based on the capital. Just based on size, geography, that sort of thing.
Yeah, maybe that's a good place to start. I'm curious, anybody online have any thoughts on how we might start trying to define
And
need or?
Elise Ackerman is one of our former regional managers at DOLA years ago. So I think she's actually lived this. Elise, do you have any thoughts?
You cut out. Can you repeat that?
Eric was just trying to put you on the spot, Elise, to ask how we might start defining need for local governments.
Sorry, it's still cut out. Say it again.
Apologies. I said Eric was just trying to put you on the spot to start thinking about how we define need for local government funding.
Oh, yeah. He's good at putting me on the spot. So I'll give it thought.
Yeah,
I've been thinking about it.
Any other thoughts or questions on that front? I do want to be sure we have some time to talk about our treatment of future funding options in the report, but this has been helpful for me to hear folks' ideas on the needs assessment piece. So I think something that will take our collective effort and expertise to really polish in the coming months. So, but any other thoughts before we move on?
Well, no, we've done a good job when the water people can describe the local government stuff and the local government stuff can describe the water stuff. Then we're set.
Do you feel, Karen, like that has given you some stuff to work on? Some additional questions to ask of this team and
Yeah, and I'm looking to our research team too. I think that gives us a starting point, and I think we can at least start to describe, for example, kind of the water project funding estimate could include and what the limitations of those estimates are. Unclear how we would get a more accurate estimate at this point, but I think we have a good starting point.
and go ahead.
Is it helpful to frame it more as, hey, look, $160 million a year is in question. And because the need is billions of dollars, presumably, we're never gonna get there. So job one is fill that. Oh, but we also know that, you know, this thing is coming, and so we need a little bit more, or maybe that's the number. I don't know.
I think that's a reasonable suggestion. As we look at like framing the needs analysis, you know, describing that dynamic at the very least feels reasonable. And if we could drill in further, great, but we've just spent 45 minutes talking about how hard it is to fill in those gaps.
I mean, we like to use the phrase silent epidemic. I mean, I think the infrastructure crisis, and not in this, just in Colorado, but nationwide, I mean, it is terrifying. And yet it's not sexy. It's not, you know, no one wants to talk about poop, you know, and water, wastewater treatment and all this. But I mean, it is a crisis. And I mean, we've got aging systems all across the state. And these are, you know, small communities that don't have two nickels to rub together. And there are emerging technologies. We funded something really cool system last year that was looking at some innovative ways of, you know, of treating that could save, you know, save millions. But I mean, it is, we can't underscore it enough. And I always kind of feel like when I say stuff to like legislators and others, and I'm, you know, shaking my fists and they're all just kind of staring at me. And I'm just like, how do I get this across? That, I mean, this is, you should be worried about this because it's coming soon to your community. And, I feel alarmist. I feel like Chicken Little, but I really do feel like this is what's coming down.
I think you're in good company because I think this group around this table, probably spends time up at night thinking about those problems as well. Yeah,
true worry, true concern.
All right, well, thank you for that discussion. I think it was my hope going into that we could, I mean, one, I think get across to everyone how hard it will be to define need, but two, start to identify what the unanswered questions are, what those challenges are. I think it gives us and the research team a lot to go forward with. More to come on that. I want to spend a little bit of time just talking about the way in which the report should discuss future funding options. So I think earlier in the meeting, we talked a bit about, you know, having a section describing the potential pathways. I think that's great. If folks have other thoughts on that now, that's fine. But I want to talk a little bit more as we have individual ideas or potential revenue raising options being added to this list, either through public comment, through interviews, other. I want to get a sense from this group of how, in what level of detail should the research team be analyzing those options? Or are we running 5 revenue scenarios for each option, or is just, you know, a general range acceptable? Those sorts of questions. And so I'm really interested to hear how the group is thinking about, like, when you read through this final report and you see a list of, say, 10 new ideas, what do you want to see in that section as far as, you know, a consistent analysis of each idea?
All I can think is the more detail you go down, the bigger error you're really gonna come out in the long run. So broader categories, broader scope, frame things.
And it seems to me like the devil's in the details a little bit, like in order to hone in on a specific estimate, you probably need a lot more information about maybe the final product, so a range seems more achievable.
Yeah.
At this stage.
Yeah, and I think this is what Brian's saying. Tell me if I'm wrong. Sort of the 2-step. One is, what is the existing need, real-time need, year to year right now, that gap we're supposed to fill? And then how do you build sort of that long-term permanent funding, you know, over the next 20, 50 years, projects like a trust fund. So those two sort of different pathways.
I think. One is, hey, legislature, stop messing around with the money. Stop creating problems that you have to go now fix. Two is, where can we work within the very strange rules of Colorado to either enterprise some of this or debruce some of this or whatever. Because the last piece is the hardest piece, and one that we're not well prepared for is going to the ballot. Everything's gotta go to the ballot. And there it's, I think, categories of, ways that you could fund it. Either through sin taxes or sales tax stuff. Or, further debrucing of creative things. But that's how I've tried to compartmentalize it, but. And I think, I talked a bunch about this in my interviews. I don't know, severance tax marries local government water. Maybe that there's a reason for them to be together in the future, but as we explore it, I think we've got to figure out how to make both of those whole, but probably separately in different mechanisms. Because we can't explain it, let alone explain them together. Of like, hey, voter, we need this, infrastructure stuff and this water system. It's gonna get real unwieldy.
Other thoughts on level of detail of analysis? Or structure of those sections, as Brian has sort of just laid out.
Are we talking about funding sources now?
Funding sources, other creative mechanisms that create flexibility.
I do think there might be opportunities to look at interest on some of the funds that the state has, whether it's interest on the reserve or interest on severance that's constantly getting swept, or interest on unclaimed property. Things that we don't traditionally rely on, but it's there. Just putting that there as an option.
Yeah. Yeah, and so, I mean, maybe that's a good point to highlight, that the current draft is very light on new ideas. I think we've established earlier in this meeting that by the end of February, we'd like to have as many of those new ideas on the list as possible. And so whether they're raised now or later, great, but I think if folks have specific ideas they'd like to discuss now, please do. But if folks have other thoughts as well on sort of the detailed level of analysis, I think I'm still interested to hear from more of you about sort of what each section on each idea encompasses.
Nate, can I clarify? I interpreted your initial question to be like funding estimates for each idea. Are you talking just more generally in terms of like
Yes,
how
that was just,
this should proceed?
funding estimates was one idea or one example of the type of thing
Okay.
I could envision that section including, but I think, yeah, more broadly, what types of questions do we want answered about each of these concepts? I think, maybe this is a good question for homework between now and our next meeting to come back more prepared to really dive into that discussion. But I think the more guidance that we can provide the water center, the better, so that they're able to strategically allocate their time and produce the product that this group wants to see at the end. So I think the more direction we can provide, the better, both on specific ideas for potential new revenue and exactly what questions we want them to go out and answer about those ideas.
It just seems like we would want, if you had an idea, you'd want some of the pros for that idea and the cons and the difficulties that may be encountered when you bring up an idea like the bottle tax with Coke and Pepsi and who might push back on that or how it might be seen by the public or all of those kind of things. Just to kind of compare the things and maybe that will help raise a couple to the top.
Yeah, I like that idea, Jim. And we'll need to be careful what we bucket in pro and con because different people might view those differently.
Yeah.
But no, I think that's
Right.
I think I think the spirit of your idea I think is right. Like what are how will different groups perceive the idea? How will it affect
There you go.
those groups?
$1 on every Taylor Swift album, those girls can't vote yet, so.
I know, I wouldn't miss this with
Yeah.
like, it's dangerous stuff.
One man's rose, another woman's cup.
Tax the children.
Yes. That's a bumper sticker right there.
Oh,
So we are nearing, we had in our agenda set 3:20 as the time set aside for public comment. In case anybody had timed their participation here to offer comment at 3:20, I want to honor that, but I think we can come back to the discussion if no one has offered public comment yet. I don't know of anyone planning to, but I do want to open it for
well, I
public.
got some things.
So it does look like we do have at least one public comment in the room. Ken, if you want to come up and sit in one of the chairs here, I think you'll be able to be seen and heard on the camera here. And please just, if you'd like, identify yourself. Yeah, whatever comment.
Good afternoon. My name is Ken Brenner. I'm with the Yampa White Green Roundtable and the Headwaters of the Colorado Initiative. But I have a long history in local governments. And a couple reflections I have listening to your discussion. One of the things, he had a little bit of planning money left over at our roundtable from an IWMP, and we decided to use that money to update our projects list inventory. We had just done that for our IWMP, the 20 projects we have there. So we did a pretty thorough spreadsheet that said, who's your proponent? Who's your active lead proponent? Have you initiated planning? Do you have partners? There's a whole checklist of just the logical steps that signify that you're actually trying to do something. You're not just, because there's a lot of those projects on our main list that nothing's happened in 10 years. And so I know to the point that you were trying to make, we want to prioritize the projects that actually make sense, that, you know, there's a real urgent need that people are already beginning to work on this. So those are projects that should move toward the top. Let's see. What type of a project? The measurement infrastructure needs that we have today, you know, the state engineer's office has really gone to great lengths to try to make sure that we're doing a good job of administering the water. And given the nature of the negotiations that we're seeing is going to continue to be a really important priority. So that's a big one, is storage. That's the theme that we're using with IBCC right now, is like storage projects. You know, are we enlarging or are we talking about a new project? The municipal needs I know are enormous, you know, having spent 8 years on city council and working with CML's executive board. Huge challenge to find that because there's so many small communities just that don't have the capacity. I'm assuming that we're talking about preparing for the legislature to do some kind of a referred measure. So who's the proponent? You know, none of the government agencies can have anything to do with this thing once it goes, if in fact they do refer it. So it would be really important before we got too far down this to make sure that somebody's stepping forward saying, we want to be, you know, working that campaign hard. And that's, because I always sort of think backwards, you know, like what does the ballot question say? You know, and then you build your case around that. I can tell you my experience is the simpler that question is, the better chance you got. It's got to be really simple. And it doesn't even have to do a whole lot with exactly what you want. It's what is it that they find valuable? And well, obviously water would be an important part of everybody's life. And how are we, what are we asking you to do that's going to address that concern? And those are just a couple of ideas and thoughts that I had just listening to your discussion. You know, it wouldn't be a huge ask of the legislature to have all of the roundtables update that list and to give them some sort of really set criteria so that you can compare base to base it really easily. You've got them into the categories that you wanted to find out that information about. Thank you for a chance to comment, and thank you for the work that you're doing. I guess the only other comment I had is this severance task force. And we're not really talking much about severance tax. And, you know, we have some opportunities, and I know we've looked at this in the past. This is all not an easy topic. But I know that the mineral and energy extraction industry would probably be way more open to something like this if we told them very specifically what it was that we wanted and let them put their name on it so that they can say, yes, we're making sure that part of the severance tax that we pay is going very specifically to this that has to do with water. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other public comment, either in the room or online? If you're online, feel free to raise your hand and I can allow you to speak. All right, seeing none, maybe some closing thoughts. I appreciate people, one, making the effort to be here in person. I said it at the beginning, but I think having 7 of our 10 members here in person was better than I had hoped for, given the geographic diversity of the group in all corners of the state. So, and thank you to those who were able to join us online. Appreciate your continued effort on this task force. I think this conversation has highlighted that. The question we've been asked to answer is challenging, but I think we've identified some solid next steps, and zeroed in more specifically on what those challenges will be that we need to address. And so I hope folks are able to, spend some time thinking about these unanswered questions and issues between now and our next meeting. As I expressed earlier, I will hope to schedule that about a month from now, right at the end of February. Other final thoughts from any in the group? Yeah, Robert.
One thing I'll just throw out there as a discussion point way to think about it is coming from the private sector is what barriers are in place to allow private entities to do the water projects. That we're not going to be able to fund all the need that's out there. So are there things that we could suggest that create opportunities for partnerships to privately do those projects?
Yeah, thanks for that. Other thoughts as we wrap up? Well, more to come. Any final thoughts online? Everybody can.
I would like to come to the next meeting with a more detailed list of concepts that we can react to. I don't want to get into, all of the specifics of different sources of potential revenue, but just list them out a little more clearly and we can really hone in. We need to spend some time specifically on how we're going to prioritize our work on those. So I think having a more detailed list that we can react to. We'll work on that.
Thanks. I think that's something we can all work on.
Yeah.
Is your vision there like bottle bill 50 million to do X, or is it sort of that formula?
What I'm thinking, and this is me in my own head right now. We've got kind of these general categories. So one is, alternative revenue sources. That could be sin taxes, it can be, whatever else. And then list a few of the options that folks have discussed during interviews. Other ones are, the trust fund, how to stop sweeps, enterprising, debrucing, listing out those options, and then some of the specifics. I don't think we'll get into potential revenue generation at this point, but yeah.
Cool. I think we'll all come ready to talk through that list. It'll be a longer list at that time as well. Well, barring any final comments, I think we'll wrap up this meeting and appreciate everyone joining online and in the room, and stay tuned. We've got a lot of work to do between now and the final report being delivered on July 15th.